There is. We are in.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I offer in behalf of Senator Durenberger, Senator Simpson, and myself an amendment.
The clerk will report the amendment.
The senator from Illinois, Mr. Simon, for himself and others, proposes an amendment numbered 351. At the appropriate place, insert the following section. Government-sponsored enterprises report to Congress. A, in general, a government-sponsored enterprise, hereinafter in this section referred to as a GSE, shall submit an annual report to the Congress containing the following information. 1, a list including the name and address of each contractor, consultant, agent, or employee hired by the GSE to engage in A, grassroots organizing or campaigning, B, public relations, media consulting, or image advertising, or C, lobbying.
Consent that the amendment be considered as read.
Without objection, let the record indicate that on this amendment there is a 1 hour time limit to be equally divided.
And Mr. President, I'm pleased to say, and I note that your successor as presiding officer is just walking in, and he will be pleased to note we're not going to take an hour, and I'm pleased that we've been able to work out some details of this amendment with my distinguished friend from Michigan, as well as our friends on the other side. This amendment affects government-sponsored enterprises. It does not limit anything they do. It simply says that government-sponsored enterprises have to report to us. They do not have, for example, SEC requirements and other things that other businesses have. Now, I frankly got involved in this because of the direct loan situation. We have, as our #1 opponents in this, the Student Loan Marketing Association, which we created. Now, my friends might be interested in noting why would the Student Loan Marketing Association, they ought to be out interested in students, helping students. They ought to be interested in helping taxpayers. The direct loan program of the President is of substantial help to students. When it is fully enacted, there will be hundreds of thousands of students who will be able to be helped, who go to college, who are not going now. And second, it's going to save the taxpayers huge amounts of money in subsidies that we now give to banks and the secondary markets. Now, why would an organization like the Student Loan Marketing Association be interested? Well, my friends, and my colleague from Michigan and the presiding officer, you may be interested in knowing this. This is the compensation for officers of Sallie Mae. This is 1991 figures. Haven't been able to find them out for 1992. Here's the CEO. $2,187,651. Not too bad for a government-sponsored enterprise that uses taxpayers' money. Chief Operating Officer, $1,741,337. Senior Vice President for Finance, $826,268. Senior Vice President for Programs, $735,535. Senior Vice President for Marketing, $726,978, the #5 executive. Way over here, I just put this so we know, this is the President of the United States. He gets $200,000 a year, less than 1/10 the Chief Executive Officer of Sallie Mae. You want to know why the Student Loan Marketing Association is opposed to this thing that is so good for students, so good for taxpayers? Now, it is true the banks are interested here because they make, on the average, believe it or not, more money on a student loan than they do on a car loan or a house mortgage. And they're a private enterprise. Well, in a sense, we created banks, but very, very indirectly. But they don't have the kind of problems we have here. Now, what do they do in lobbying? It's very difficult to find out, and that's what we want to. This amendment says, let's disclose what they do in lobbying. Well, it is very interesting. You would think that the most important issue facing this Congress this century is direct loans. Patton, Boggs, and Blow. These are all indirect things that work with Sallie Mae, hired by Nellie Mae. And incidentally, these are all my friends. Tommy Boggs, we all respect him, we like him, but there's no question. They're good. Clohan and Dean, Bill Clohan, John Dean, Buddy Blakey work in this firm, good people. Student Loan Funding Corporation of Ohio. Williams and Jensen, J.D. Williams, friend of many of us, hired by Sallie Mae. Aiken, Gump, Strauss, Hauer, and Field by the USA Group, another major student loan marketing group, works with Sallie Mae. Walker Free Associates, again, Charles Walker. Nice people. These are all people who have just been hired to work on this direct loan thing that is so good for students and so good for taxpayers. All right, hand me the rest of those. We're just starting, and I don't know that we've reached them all because we have no disclosure requirement on these government-sponsored enterprises. The Wexler Group, hired by Sallie Mae. Ann Wexler, great respect for her. Winston and Strawn, a great Illinois firm. Student Loan Funding Corporation. Wiley, Ryan, and Felding, United States Aid Funds. Cassidy and Associates, Powell and Tate. That's our good friend Jody Powell and others. Good people, fine people. Widmeyer Group, Coalition for Student Reform. These, in behalf of the guarantee agencies who work with us. The guarantee agencies, some of whom do a good job, some of whom do a terrible job, as the GAO has pointed out. And then they have 2 full-time lobbyists, at least, that we know about. All this amendment does, it says they can go ahead and hire all these lobbyists and try and defeat the taxpayers and defeat the students, but let's disclose what they're doing. Let's let the public know what the government-sponsored enterprise is. Now, this applies also, so my colleagues understand, applies to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac too. But frankly, I don't know that there is similar abuse, but we ought to know. Jim Johnson, who heads Fannie Mae, in my opinion, is one of the finest public servants we have. He's just a good public official. But we ought to know what's going on. They have hired the top lobbyists. They have sent out, Sallie Mae has sent out letters to college officials. You'd never guess the bill that we have introduced. By the way, Sallie Mae has described the group. And if I can find it in my notes here, but while GAO says schools are going to save money, and the General Accounting Office is, if I had a graph and showed you why they're going to save money, it would be very clear. Sallie Mae, in their letter to the college presidents, and I'd like to ask unanimous consent, Mr. President, to put into the record the letter sent to the college president, 2 letters sent by Sallie Mae here.
Without objection, so ordered.
It says, on a per unit basis, we found that costs will increase about $125 per loan. In fact, the GAO study says costs will go down. And incidentally, the cost to the taxpayers, because we're going to end up with the IRS collecting, the cost to the taxpayers will diminish, not just overnight, but gradually. This year, taxpayers are spending $2.9 billion on student loan defaults. I could go on and other errors in their letters. I think the basic question we have to ask is, what is their motive for fighting this? Well, I think it's very clear. They got pretty good salaries. And incidentally, they also have, it's not only these salaries, if you get on the board, if you have any friends who want a good job, get on the board of Sallie Mae. You get $6,000 a meeting. Not too bad. Plus other benefits that go with it. Anyway, what this amendment does is basically says we ought to disclose. It doesn't stop them from lobbying, doesn't stop them from doing these other things, but let's get information about the salaries. Let's get information about what they're doing in the way of spending money. We created these entities, and they, in at least one case, Sallie Mae, has turned into a monster. I'm not suggesting that for Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. We have to do better in our country. And Mr. President, my understanding, if I may ask to have the attention of the senator from Michigan, is the amendment agreeable?
He's recognized.
I thank the chair. First, let me commend our friend from Illinois on this amendment. He is addressing an issue which needs to be addressed. We have taken on part of this issue before, personally, when it comes to the salaries of the executives of the entities that he's talking about. We finally got an amendment adopted back in June of 1992, which made it clear that the new federal regulator would exercise the same compensation oversight at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that applies to federally insured financial institutions, and that oversight would consist not only of prohibiting future compensation abuses and monitoring compensation practices, but also look at compensation arrangements already in place. And the reason that we did that back in June of '92 was when the chief executive officer of Fannie Mae left his position and was paid, as he was walking out of the door, $20 million plus in compensation. $20 million plus.
Not too bad.
Not bad at all. So we have been very much involved in the salary issue that the senator raises and would require to be disclosed in his amendment. The senator's amendment gets to the lobbying expenses, which is very important, of these entities. For the reasons that he states, these are government-sponsored, and we surely should know much more information about them that we're able to require about other entities. Now, these GSEs are covered by our lobbying disclosure law, but what the senator is doing, and properly so, is he is requiring that additional information relative to those entities be filed with the Congress.
That is correct.
And I think that his amendment is modified, is right on target. I congratulate him and his co-sponsors for doing it, and he is addressing a problem of real concern, and I accept the amendment. I have no objection to it, and I believe that the
Debate on the amendment?
I don't think the amendment has yet been cleared on the other side, and I note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President, if you can suspend the request for the action, and there's a book about the government-sponsored enterprises called A State of Risk by Thomas Stanton. He quotes President Andrew Jackson, and let me just read what the book says. President Andrew Jackson once observed of the Bank of the United States, the grandfather of today's elephant. That's, we're talking about the Sallie Mae type of thing, that, quote, if any private citizen or public functionary should interpose to curtail its powers or prevent a renewal of its privileges, it cannot be doubted that he would be made to feel its influence. There's no question they have immense power. And I'm not suggesting that any of their powers be curtailed. I'm not suggesting that they have to report to the SEC as other businesses do, though I favor that, frankly. All I'm saying is they better disclose more details than they are now disclosing. And I hope, and I'm pleased to have Senator Simpson and Senator Durnberger on that side of the aisle as co-sponsors of this resolution, and I would hope we could get the approval on the other side of the aisle, too.
Mr. President.
Senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, we think we're close to getting clearance on that side of the aisle, but we haven't quite gotten it yet. And again, I want to emphasize what the amendment does. We already cover the lobbyists of the GSEs in our bill. It is the additional information, very appropriately, that would be required to be filed with the Congress under this amendment. So I would think we not only are entitled to that information, but we would find that information mighty useful in our authorization appropriation process. And it has been cleared on this side of the aisle, and I hope that it will be briefly on the other side, but I can't represent yet that it has been, so I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.